thought they would benefit from having him in office. When you take that kind of money and spend it on a mass television campaign and use every dirty trick that you know how to get yourself into a position of power, and use that position of power to further your own growth, and when you use the power to pay back all the people that brought you into office, and the people who are sitting at home watching television are being brainwashed by all the crud that was sent out by the Republican committee on behalf of our dear president, well, they've just been victimized, haven't they?
Yes, but I think back, though, Frank, to the late 60s and all of the demonstrations that were going on then, and wonder if maybe they weren't originated by the White House.
I'm sure that a lot of them were.
And is that perhaps why the people aren't together now, demonstrating or whatever, or letting their feelings be felt?
If you stage a pseudo-political demonstration, that you're going to have a hardcore of maybe 5% of the people who are interested in the issue that the demonstration was about. You're going to have another 5 or 10% agitators that were installed by the establishment. The rest of the people were going to go down there to see if their friends showed up and maybe get laid after they put their picket sign down.
How much of what you've said in the last few minutes would you say is in your music?
Oh, it's all there, one way or another.
I am the slime.
You are?
No, the record is actually. But this particular record, I Am the Slime, which has to do with the slime oozing out of your video, is that some of it? Or are you talking about more than just...
Well, the influence of television is a negative sociological element in the hands of big business and big government is, well, it's a complicated thing to think about, because it's not just what it can do to you to make you vote for somebody who shouldn't be in office, but it's all the horrible things that it sells to you and the lifestyle that it merchandises to you and makes you want things that aren't really necessary.
So you're talking about more than just the political aspect.
That's only one aspect of the oozing. If you're going to play it, play the one off the single, because I think it's a better
want to hear
mix.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
I took the echo off of the voice so that the lyrics came out better.
All right, because I was going to play it, as a matter of fact. You could tell I wasn't just getting it out to dust it off.
Well, I thought you were going to play it, yeah. It had occurred to me that you would play it.
What, this has been released as a single now. I don't know how we worked to this point, but here we are. I'm the Slime has been released as a single, as a 45.
Not only has it been released as a single, it has been released as a single because the people in the commercial end of the business at Warner Brothers in Hollywood actually thought that it had a chance of getting on the radio. It's the last thing out of the album that I ever would have suspected was a single potential release, but Ron Saul said, hey, this one could be a hit. So who am I to argue with somebody who is as smart as Ron Saul?
This one. David Marsden and Frank Zappa here. Now, that's interesting. Since day one, I think, it's actually been printed on your albums, and I know that you've said it in the music, that radio stations wouldn't play your records. In fact, from the very first, this won't make it on radio. And on the front of Reuben and the Jets, it says one more attempt, or something to that effect, to get our music played on radio. How does it feel now? Maybe you're going to have a single that will be played all over the place.
Well, it's a curious paradox, because suddenly we have an album that a lot of people like, and it's selling very well in the United States. I think it's doing well here. It's already a #1 album in Finland.
Really?
That's right. And has been for quite some time. It's sold more copies in Finland than any record has ever sold.
That's
for some mysterious reason.
That's
the week that it was released, it went on the charts at #6 there. We had just played 3 concerts in Helsinki right at the time that it came out. But in spite of all this, now that there's a vinyl shortage, it looks like it's going to be cut off, because we're having trouble making the album available for all the people who are interested in getting it. And right now, the single that you just played is an American copy that's just been sent out in the States, and you don't even have the single in Canada.
That's right.
So here we are at a great point in our career with something that people are interested in and no way to supply the demand. That's showbiz, folks. Tough tushy.
Do you think you've changed? Do you think that this response to your music is? Do you think your music has changed, or do you think that the buyer, the listener, has changed? Which is that?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
What has changed your music? Just time, or have you consciously done it?
Well, every time you have a new band, the music changes. So we constantly change the band.
Is this the happiest you've been with your musicians?
I think that this is the best collection of musicians so far.
And you're a perfectionist?
Yep.
I mean, I know this is true. I'm asking if you believe it.
Well, I wouldn't say that this band is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I'll probably change it again. But as of, I think this is probably about the 14th combination of personalities to be on the road expressing mothers of invention type music, and I think it's the most efficient so far.
Let's go back to, the beginning.
What beginning?
Oh, whatever beginning you want. The very beginning, I suppose. Freak Out may have been considered the beginning for you, was it?
Well, it was the first commercially released record by the Mothers.
What was going on with you before that?
I had a recording studio of my own, and I had been making rhythm and blues type records that had been leased as masters to other companies.
By making them, do you mean producing or actually
I had been producing, playing on them, singing on them, and
anything that
engineering them.
Were you working under a different name?
Frank Zappa.
Anything that we would recognize?
Well, let's see. On the original sound label, there's a song called Memories of El Monte, another song called Mr. Clean, another song called Jesse Lee, and another song called Grunion Run. On the Donna label, there's a song called Every Time I See You, and Ned and Nelda. And on the Viga label, there's The Big Surfer. On the Emmy label, there's...
The Big Surfer, was that kind of like a Beach Boys surfer type thing?
No. It was a comedy record that had as its premise Kennedy judging a surfer dance contest and awarding the winner a all-expense-paid vacation as the first member of the Peace Corps to be sent to Alabama. And
what year was that now?
63 or 64.
What about before you were doing this recording studio thing? What were you doing before that? Never hear about those things.
I used to work writing advertising copy for the First National Bank of Ontario, California. I did national advertising for a greeting card company and designed greeting cards for a place in Claremont, California. I worked part-time as a musician in a nightclub called Tommy Sandy's Club Sahara, wearing a white tuxedo and patent leather shoes with my hair gassed back, playing the anniversary waltz 6 nights a week.
Really? I want this greeting card. Do you mean by greeting cards, you mean the things you get at Christmas and you open them up and it says...
Christmas, birthday...
and you wrote the little things inside? No,
I actually designed the covers for them.
Oh.
I used to be a commercial artist.
How did all of that eventually lead to your first commercial album, as you call it, the Freak Out album? How did that lead to the Mothers of Invention?
Well, you see, it actually started in high school. You see, I have an interest in pussy, you know what I mean? And a lot of people in high school have an interest in this pursuit. And at the time, I graduated by the skin of my teeth from Antelope Valley High School.
Where's that?
That's in Lancaster, California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert.
That's right, yes.
They allowed me to escape with about 20 units less than you're supposed to have to graduate. Some wise person in the office there at the school scratched his head for a moment and said, if we don't get him out of here now, he'll have to stay another year and we'll really be in trouble. So I got out, and when school reconvened, I noticed that the quantity of available appurtenances on the Poonscape was quite diminished. And I figured that just at the last moment, before enrollment closed at the local junior college, that if I was going to get nooked that season, I'd better go where the action was, which was junior college, ladies and gentlemen. So I checked in. And I'd gone to about 3 months of the term there at the junior college when my parents had to move to another location. So I lost all of my credits for that first semester of junior college and enrolled in another one in Ontario, California. Actually, it was, Ontario. And so I hung around there long enough to find somebody to shack up with me, and as soon as I did, I quit school. And I lived with this girl for about a year, who I eventually married and stayed married to for 5 years. And all during that time, I was trying to write orchestra music and earn my living as a commercial artist and all that miserable crud that you have to do. So eventually, our marriage did not work out. And I moved into the recording studio, which I had purchased with some money earned from writing a score for a motion picture of ill repute. And then...
was that a motion picture we would recognize?
Well, it's been on television a few times. The name of the film is Run Home Slow. It stars Mercedes McCambridge. It's a Western. I've scored 3 features, including 200 Motels.
Yes.
The first one that I did was called The World's Greatest Sinner, which is a absolutely ridiculous film about some guy who wants to find out whether or not he's really God, as he imagines himself to be. His big test is to break into a Greek Orthodox church, steal a piece of communion bread, and stick a pin in it to see if it'll bleed. And that's the big scene in the film.
Does it?
Well, yes. You don't. Well, the way they do it is, it's so cheap. I mean, what can I say?
Okay, so
there's some blood on the grass, and then suddenly the film goes into Technicolor. It's one of those.
Shocker.
Really a shocker.
God. All right, so now we've got you with this lady here.
So, I filed for a divorce and moved into my recording studio, which had no bath and no hot water. And I was unemployed and earned my meager existence from cashing in pop bottles in order to buy peanut butter, bread, and cigarettes. And fortunately, Motorhead, who was a friend of mine from high school, happened to be cruising around that time, made an expedition into the night, and somehow or another managed to, by illicit means, acquire a case of coffee and a bunch of fake cream and some wooden sticks to stir it with, and I managed to acquire a 40-cup coffee maker, so at least I was under control for that. And I worked jobs on the weekend 80 miles away in a little barbecue joint in the middle of the Mojave Desert, played for 2 nights per week, made myself, after gasoline expenses, approximately $7 for a weekend. And the rest of the time I had access to a recording studio that boasted the only 5-track machine in the world. It was a homemade recorder that was constructed by a gentleman named Paul Buff, who now owns a company called Allison Research. They make the Keypex and the Gain Brain and all those other things.
Yeah.
Well, Paul built the studio and I bought it from him.
Does that mean that Allison, the lady, you're familiar with Allison?
Allison used to be the waitress at the Cucamonga Malt Shop.
I thought perhaps that she was Suzy.
No, Allison used to be the waitress at the malt shop, and Paul, who was so busy with electronics and had very little time for ladies, went down there one day and bought a malt and fell in love. And immediately they started living in a trailer. It was one of those kind of romantic things. And Allison is his wife. She's also an excellent singer. And
really?
He used to record her multiple track and make these gigantic ladies choruses out of her voice. She's really good.
She's not a very good talker, that's why.
She has a nice personality, and she is a nice person, and I like Allison. And Paul is also a genius.
Well, now, okay, so now
anyway,
you're working in this studio.
Yeah, I got this studio, see, and I'm still scanning the Poonscape, you understand. And I'd managed to scan it quite heavily. I found the density in that area to be quite succulent, and I'm having the troops in and out of there quite frequently, and when I'm not taking advantage of the physical delights of the area, I can sit in a chair in front of a recording console and play all the instruments myself and spend 11 hours and come out with a completed track. So that's what I did. I alternated my time between drinking stolen coffee, eating peanut butter, making multiple track recordings, and jumping up and down in the little back room there at the studio.
At what point did you pick up and learn how to play all of these instruments? Was this just natural?
The tracks were not using an extreme variety of instruments. You know, it was guitar, bass, drums, piano, vibes. And you can do a lot of interesting things with just that assortment of instruments.
And then from all of this playing around...
I was looking around for a group that would stay together long enough to make a career of music so we could go out on stage and actually play it without having to overdub. But anyway, I digress. What happened was I had this young lady staying with me there at the studio, and she had a friend, and her friend had a baby, and the baby was a different color than the lady. And we were across the street from a Holy Roller Church in a town of a population of 7,500 of mostly, how shall I say this, ladies and gentlemen, Italians, and other people of various nationalities who did not approve of a recording studio in the middle of a town that boasted as its major industry wine stomping and television repair work. And so the neighbors started complaining, and also my hair was longer than anybody else's. It happened to be shorter than anything the Beatles ever grew, but it was too long by Cucamonga standards, and they resented my clothing. I wore T-shirts in a town where everybody was deflected with an appearance that, well, you know, how shall I say this, ladies and gentlemen, white short-sleeve shirts like a grocery checker with a bow tie. You know, that was the costume for Cucamonga in those days. And so if you wore a T-shirt, you either had to be a queer or a pervert or a weirdo of some description. So I had this place, had a sign out there in the front that said Studio Z, record your band, $13.50 an hour. And this looked very subversive to the neighborhood. By the way, that studio used to be called PAL Studios, and there were two very important records of the 60s recorded there. Wipeout.
Oh, isn't that
and
incredible?
Pipeline. Paul Buff engineered both of those, and they were both made there. Wipeout was done in one take. I'm sure you realize
Obviously,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, you can hear it.
That was at that time your studio.
No, that was Paul's studio. But see, they didn't pay him, and so he went into debt. And I bought the studio, all of its assets and liabilities, which were quite extensive, including a lot of back rent, for $1,000. Now, if you can imagine getting a recording console and all the recording equipment, two pianos, one of them a baby grand, and all the rest of this stuff for $1,000, only you have to pay off his debts, would you take the deal? I was dumb enough to.
Just for the 5-track machine.
Really? I still have that, by the way. So anyway, I'm sitting in there, and I'm having a sort of a grand bohemian existence there in Cucamonga, and the police department, or shall I be more specific, the San Bernardino County Vice Squad, probably at the behest of the religious fanatics across the street, had me investigated. And they couldn't find that I was doing anything wrong, so they decided to set me up. And they sent in a secret agent whose name was Willis. He came in there and gave me a bogus name, and told me that he was a used car salesman, and that some of the boys wanted to have a stag party the following Wednesday, and they wanted to know whether I could make them a film or a hot tape to gratify the used car people. So I said, sure, you know, what's wrong with taking somebody's money in order to amuse a used car salesman? You know, they need to be amused just like everybody else. Well, this guy is sitting there telling me the tape has to include sucking, and, you know, listed off all this whole barrage of stuff. You know, I'm saying, oh yeah, is that what you guys like? Sure, yeah. When do you want it? And he said, oh, can I pick it up tomorrow? I said, sure. You know, so that night I manufactured a tape which sounded no more or no less erotic than side 4 of the Freak Out album. In fact, we spent about 20 minutes to make it, and after I cut the laughs out of it, it came down to about 11 minutes. I put it in a box and wrote hot poop on the box with a magic marker. And he was going to give me $100 for this tape. So the next day he came back, said he only had $50. I said, well, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And before I could stick the tape never even changed hands. I'm still holding it in my hand when he goes, zip, pulls out a badge, throws handcuffs on me, all these guys rush in with cameras, and they start searching the place, and going through this big, ridiculous number. And I was set up on a thing that's called illegal entrapment. And being penniless, could not afford to hire an attorney to go down there and do something about it. So when they finally filed the complaint, they misplaced one of the decimal points in the penal code of one of the charges, and when a bail bondsman came down there to check me out, he was just going strictly by the numbers, and he says, oh boy, your bail's going to be somewhere around $20,000 for this, because one of the things that I was charged with was molesting a teenage girl under 14 or something like that, because they moved a decimal point someplace. So finally, my father managed to borrow some money someplace, and they sprung me out of there, while my succulent female accomplice, who had worked with me on the tape, was locked up, still in San Bernardino. So in order to get her out, I had to go to Art LeBeau, who still owed me royalties on Memories of El Monte and Grunion Run and all those things. Went in there and sort of grabbed him by the throat and throttled him around a little bit and said, give me my bucks so I can, hey. And I went back and got her out. And I found out that they had been spying on us with listening devices. His wristwatch had a microphone in it that was broadcasting to a truck with a tape recorder. I mean, it was a full-scale science fiction investigation for no reason at all. Must have cost them thousands and thousands of dollars. And I went to the ACLU and asked for assistance to, do you have that here? You know what it is? It's the American Civil Liberties Union. It's a thing that provides legal assistance for worthy causes for people who blah blah, and they said, oh no, it's not important enough for us to handle, and go away. And my father went and got himself in hock for about $1,000 and hired a local attorney named Mr. Balaud of the esteemed firm of Balaud, Althouse, and Blair. And they took the case, and Mr. Balaud was a little bit embarrassed about taking a case of this magnitude, And what he did was he made a deal with the 27-year-old assistant district attorney who thought I was a creep, and he was out to make his big reputation for stamping out smut in the area. And they asked me to plead nolo contendere, which in normal terms means you don't have enough money to hire a lawyer, so you don't say that you're guilty, you just say, I give up,
Right.
and hurl yourself on the mercy of the court, the American judicial system being as quaint as it is. So when you ain't got no money, that's what you got to do. So I said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, nolo contendere. And then the guy says, well, he didn't really do anything, misdemeanor, blah, blah, blah. The assistant district attorney says, no, he's a criminal. We must, we must punish him. We must do all this stuff. So I got sentenced to 6 months in the jail, with all but 10 days suspended plus 3 years probation with all these elaborate terms, during which time if I violated any one of the terms they could slam me back in the jail for 6 months. But they insisted that I must serve some time. So the real horrible thing that happened about that, 10 days in jail wasn't that bad because I got to experience a side of life that I would have never come across had I not been weird in Cucamonga. But the thing that was really bad about it is at the time they raided the recording studio, they confiscated 80 hours of research tapes that I had been doing on sociological subjects since 1955. Also some masters for tapes that I recorded there at the studio. They refused to return them to me, and as a matter of fact, as I was being hurled out of the courtroom into the retaining cell, where they make you wait for the bus with the bars on it, where they take you to San Bernardino, this punk of a secret investigator and his bogus district attorney assistant cornered me in the hall and said, we'll make you a deal. If you'll let the sheriff decide which of those tapes are obscene, we'll give you back all the rest of them erased. And I said, first of all, it is not within my jurisdiction to convert a sheriff into a judge, and he is not to decide which of those things are obscene. And second of all, I want my tapes back. And they said, ha, 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 you'll never get them. And I never got them.
You never got them?
Never got them. They're probably still jerking off to them somewhere in San Bernardino. So I served my 10 days and got out. found out that they were going to widen the street, Archibald Avenue. 8040 Archibald Avenue is where that studio was in Cucamonga, ladies and gentlemen. They were going to widen the street, and that necessitated tearing down the studio. So I figured, well, the place is bugged anyway. I'll never be able to conduct any good business in there. So I ripped out all the stuff that I could from the equipment end and moved out of there, moved into Los Angeles, and commuted from Los Angeles to various parts of the outskirts of town looking for musicians. And it was about that time that I ran into Jimmy Carl Black, Roy Estrada, Ray Collins I had known for some time. And we got the Mothers together. There you have it, a quaint story of the olden days, ladies and gentlemen. My, how I've suffered.
That's an incredible story.
Only one of many.
Now, when the development of the Mothers of Invention came into being, at the same time the development of the image of Frank Zappa came into being, or was it always that way?
What image you talking about?
You have several, I suppose. The image of Frank Zappa as being a very strange, elusive character who does things on a stage or in a room or on the street or on record, indeed, that nobody else would do or nobody else would think about, or no one else.
That's their problem, you know. I can't help it if they don't think about those things, and I can't help it if they don't do it. If they did it, then I wouldn't be weird, would I?
But then...
See, to myself, I think that I'm quite normal, you know, and I think that the things that I do are a natural expression of my personality. I don't think that they harm anyone, and I have a good time, and I think that's what life's all about.
Oh, yes. You see, I
so
totally...
everybody out there, get a little gratification, hey.
No, I agree with you see, totally, but there's a certain image that people think of when they think of Frank Zappa.
Well, some people are offended or upset by things that are not part of their daily experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't categorize it, explain it, or deal with it in some rational way, well, you either have to be afraid of it or you have to refuse to admit that it exists. Ladies and gentlemen, I do exist. I do that stuff. I do it on purpose. I do it when I'm awake and when I'm asleep. I do it all the time.
What do you mean by you do it on purpose?
I don't do it by accident.
After you did the Freak Out album and then the follow-ups.
Now, is that any way to talk about the rest of our albums as follow-ups to Freak Out? As if Freak Out was the pinnacle of musical expression.
No, I certainly don't mean it that way, because I think that the growth has been incredible. The growth of your music and the growth of you has been incredible, because you are the music, I would think.
Been doing it for 10 years, folks. It's a lot of practice.
How much of all of that has gone down in terms of music that's gone under your name has actually been ideas or thoughts that have come from somewhere else? Any of it?
Anytime there's a thought generated from someplace else, you'll see it in print on the album cover and given credit for where it came from.
I asked that, see, because of 200 Motels, and there are several sequences in 200 Motels where it's almost implied that maybe you listen to others and then write them down. And I'm wondering whether or not you had put that in purposely.
Well, you have to understand that I wrote the script for 200 Motels.
Exactly.
And in saying or implying that I spy on members of the group in order to gather material, it's a reflection of some suspicions that people outside of the group might have had based on rumors or whatever. And it's all meant to be a put-on and a joke as to how I gather my material. I certainly don't need to extract it from other people, but I find that if I'm working with a group of personalities in a band, that it's easier for them to express material that is part of their own personality. In other words, one good example of it is the Fillmore East album, where we're talking about the girl who won't take her pants off unless the guy sings his hit single. Well, I didn't make that up. That's a true story. It really happened to Howard. And he told me the story one time, and so I thought, that's interesting enough where it should be commemorated in music and dance. And so, therefore, that section of the Fillmore East album. But there was a time when the band was sufficiently zany that I used to carry a tape recorder with me all the time on the road and just record comments on airplanes and restaurants, follow the guys around in bars, and we'd listen to the tapes later and crack up. That's why you'd see Ringo in the film sneaking around with a tape recorder. So that's an inside sort of joke.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to get out, was the fact that maybe you were trying to tell us something, and obviously you were. How about 200 Motels? Were you happy with that? With the outcome of it?
Well,
Was it
if I
what
would
you
have had
set
twice
out?
as much money to make the film, I think I could have made it 10 times better, because the problem was we only had 56 hours in which to shoot it. 7 8-hour days of videotaping. And there was an awful lot of stuff to be done, and because there was so much, you couldn't dwell on a single scene and perfect it. You know, you had to get the scene down on tape and then move on to the next thing. And it's not like...
You did all of that in 56 hours?
That's right.
Just the shooting, though?
Just the shooting, yeah.
How much time would you have spent in the editing room? And
110 hours of video editing. That was 11 10-hour days of video editing and 3 months of film handling. That includes all aspects of post-production, the dub down, sound effects, cutting in, all the rest of that stuff, release print.
The effects in the film, for example, I'm trying to think, the street scene with the black and white.
The wavy lines?
Yeah, that was done while you were shooting, or you
That's
did that?
Right.
That was done while you were shooting?
That's all done while you're shooting.
In the 56 hours, that's incredible.
That's right.
That is incredible.
That's all incredible. The only thing that's not incredible about it is the performance of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, which ruined my music.
You feel very strongly about
I'm
that.
pissed off about that. You know, I think I write good music, and I don't like to hear it played bad. And when I see 120 jerks sitting around in tuxedos ruining this stuff, and with no time to make them do a retake and play it right, it makes you angry. But that's the way it goes, folks.
You have a house, or did have a house, or supposedly had a house, which became somewhat of a, let me see, what would be the word here? A shrine in the canyon, Pasadena.
No, not Pasadena. It's Laurel Canyon. It's just up the street from Schwab's drugstore. I lived for 3 months in a house that was owned and operated at one time by Tom Mix. It's a log cabin. It has 18 rooms in it. It has a single-lane bowling alley in the basement. It has a bank vault in the basement. It has a lake on the property. It has a goldfish pond on the property. It has a number of homemade stucco caves on the property. It has a large guest house on the property. I rented it for $750 a month from a lady named Fanya, who was a weird sort of peeping Tom sort of person who would sneak around the house in the middle of the night. I lived in the house with 10 people. About 3 or 4 were members of the group, and the rest of them were just sort of people who hung out there. I paid the rent, and they lived there. It was a commune of sorts. Everybody knew where the house was. People used to knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning and ask me whether I was going to have a party. I would tell them no and close the door. I got tired of doing that, and I moved.
You only lived there 3 months.
Yeah, just about. That was in 1968. The house is located on the corner of Lookout Mountain Drive and Laurel Canyon Boulevard.
When you set out to create an album, let's say we're only in it for the money. When you set out to create an album like that, how much thought do you have before you walk into the studio?
Well, I definitely have things planned. Studio time is expensive. You have to pay by the hour for it, and you certainly don't want to go in there and jerk yourself off for 4 hours before you're going to lay something down on tape. So there's quite a bit of pre-planning for you, actually, by studio time. But once I get into the studio, if something else occurs to me other than what I planned in advance, I don't throw it away. I follow it up. So there's always room for growth at the point where you go to execute your idea.
If you were to say, I happen to have Let's Make the Water Turn Black here. Now there's a whole lead into that. And then there's the part where the record does that scratchy thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that you have planned before you go in, or the music is
No,
planned?
that's something.
Which is it?
The music gets planned. I know that in the case of this album, I was going to do certain special effects and work that in as part of the structure of the album.
So that it actually didn't just happen.
Oh, no, it's not that I bumped the needle accidentally and it made it go scratch on the record. I meticulously, I'll tell you exactly how we did it. We took a Davy Jones record that the engineer happened to have sitting around and a Garrard turntable, and we spent approximately a half an hour scratching the record, trying to get just the right kind of a record scratch. And then when we got the one that sounded good, we panned it back and forth, and that's the thing that we used as the effect in the album. That particular effect, if you figure the studio time, cost $80 an hour at that point. That effect, if we spent a half an hour to negotiate it, cost $40, plus tape, plus record, plus electricity. Voice is the voice of Gary Kellgren, who was the engineer at Mayfair Studios at the time that we recorded the album.
The song like, let's make the water turn black.
Oh yeah, I was going to tell you the story of that song.
Yeah.
While I was working in Cucamonga, there was some musicians that I used to work with, and one of them was a guitar player named Ronnie Williams. And Ronnie had some very peculiar habits. In fact, so did his brother, Kenny. Now, Ronnie's habit was saving his snots on a window in his room. And that's what the noomies are. Ronnie saves his noomies on a window in his room. This is true, ladies and gentlemen. This is a true story, direct from the olden days.
I was hoping you'd say that it was a true story, but carry on.
It is. So anyway, he used to save his snots on a window, and it wasn't just him. He had a friend, another musician that stayed with him, a guy named Dwight Bement. Dwight went on to become the sax player with Gary Puckett in the Union Gap. He wouldn't like to let everybody know that he also used to save snots with Ronnie because they grew up together in San Diego, so they shared a common interest. Meanwhile, Kenny, who was Ronnie's younger brother and who had recently been released from reform school, when he wasn't working on his car or combing his hair, he was living in back of the house in a shed with Motorhead. And there was no toilet in the shed. And so in the middle of winter, when they had to go wee-wee, or number one, or tinkle, if you prefer, instead of hanging it out the door, and thereby, it's risky when it's cold like that. And they had these mason jars in the shed because Ronnie's mom canned a lot. So they used to pee in the jars. Whoops. They used to wee-wee in the jars. And so it got to be a fetish with them as to how many of those jars they could fill up. In other words, they were saving it. And as they would fill up, say, 20 or 30 little jars, they would pour it into bigger jars till they had 8 or 9 gallons. And they started having these parties where everybody in the neighborhood would come over and whiz in these jars just to see how much they could save. This gives you a rough idea how boring it was in that town. There was nothing good on TV, so what do? You go in the shed and wee-wee in the jar. So after this got to be, it wasn't challenging anymore because they had so much of it, they left the jars alone for a while. One day, somebody there looked at one of the big jars and said, "What's that?" And there were things swimming in it. And in fact, there were things swimming in all of the jars. And it looked like this. It had a little white dot as big as your little fingernail with a black dot in the middle of it. And they had tails on them. And they were swimming in the jars, and they kept growing. And there was one dramatic moment, when Kenny actually reached into a jar with a pair of tweezers and extracted one of those items and laid it on the shop bench and poked it with a nail. And it squirted out some some clear stuff, and then it deflated. Well, soon after this, Ronnie's father, whose name is Dink, Really, his name is Dink, and he really works at a furniture store in San Bernardino. This is all true, ladies and gentlemen. The song is strictly from truth. And Dink discovered the many jars of urine in the shed and said, you guys are going to have to get rid of this stuff, you know. So what does he do? He flushes it down the toilet. Well, obviously, the things are already living in pee, right? So he flushed it down the toilet. They probably got down in the sewer system, and there were probably these horrible, gigantic beings, you know, swelling and festering underneath of the streets of Ontario, California. Oh, the other thing in there about, that's where the title of Let's Make the Water Turn Black comes from, is what was growing in the jars. And then try and imagine a window all covered in green as the Noomies. And then the other thing that they used to do is they would have this coordinated routine. Ronnie and Kenny would come over to my house, and if one of them was stricken with a gas pain, he would say, I got one. And he would immediately hurl himself to the floor, stick his legs up in the air in a certain weird position, and spread the Levi material that covered the special orifice designed for this purpose. He would cause his Levi's to become taut over the orifice, and the other assistant would lunge toward the orifice Levi area with a cigarette lighter, and they would count down 3, 2, 1, and they would emit enormous blue fireballs in the middle of my living room.
I've seen that done. That's incredible.
Yeah. That's from the part where watching a bomber burn.
That's it, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That's a beautiful story. Richard Manuel used to do that all the time. He used to light them, just a torch across the floor like that. Incredible.
Huh. What a way to live, huh? And there's nothing good on television when you have to go to bed early. If you have to stop drinking at 1 o'clock in a community like this, well, what's there left? You know, get a cigarette lighter, some sauerkraut. You're ready to go.
That's a beautiful story. I don't know how to pick up from that.
Well, just play 50-50.
How much of your music
it's all like
is
that.
real?
It's all like that, I'm telling you.
Then we could sit here all night, couldn't we?
Well, you'll sit here all night. I'm going to go have Thanksgiving dinner with the band.
Okay, I have a couple of questions that, while we were doing the music, came up. Some via the telephone. The Bizarre label. There's a little machine.
It's a vacuum pump.
It's a vacuum pump.
Mm-hmm.
Any particular reason?
I thought that it was appropriate. Think about it for a while. You'll see that there could have been no other logo possible for that company.
That's right. And the lady you have with you, how long has she been?
Ruth Underwood, and she is our female percussionist, and she is a Juilliard graduate, and she's highly skilled, extremely flamboyant, large-chested young lady, who she really whips on the marimba and timpani and vibes.
And how long has she been with you? Someone wanted to know.
Almost a year.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And who is Suzy Creamcheese, really?
There's a number of Suzy Creamcheeses. The very first original Suzy Creamcheese, the voice on the record belongs to a girl named Jeannie Vassar. And then there was the Suzy Creamcheese that was brought to the light of day as a result of a request from European promoters when we were going to do our first European tour in 1967. Everybody said, are you bringing Suzy Creamcheese with you? And I said, well, you know, I knew that the original one had taken off from Mexico someplace, and I had no way of getting a hold of her. So I hired a young lady named Pamela Lee Zarubica and employed her to be the Suzy Creamcheese representative to the peoples of Europe. And so she went over there and signed Suzy Creamcheese autographs and sat with us on stage, and that's one of them. Of course, there are numbers of other ones that come up and introduce themselves to me all over the world. They say, I am Suzy Creamcheese, and who am I to argue with them?
Would you ever think of taking that little chin hair off?
It's functional.
Frank Zappa, thank you. It's really been pleasant.
Okay.
This song we're going to go out with, is that who I think it is you've written this song for?
Who's that?
It sounds like Edgar Winter.
Edgar Winter?
50-50.
What gives you that idea?
I don't know. I just thought I heard that in it.
Well, I must say that that is probably the weirdest thing that I've ever heard since the time somebody came up to me and gave me an analysis of the text of The Idiot Bastard Son as being something about Ronald Reagan and Kennedy. And I've never heard anybody being farther off the beaten path than that.
Until now.
Until now. And I had to come to Canada to hear it, and I'm glad I heard it, and I'll tell everybody about it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
Some strange thing tells me that. Let's see now. This is CHUM-FM, by the way. Here with David Marsden on this night.